Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'm really excited to talk about this topic because it has been such a big request. Today, we're going to be talking about hashing out what 420 means for you today, and we'll get started. So first off, I always start presentations with who I am, just because you need to know who I am in order to understand the way we interact with the material today. My name is Ruth Del Pino. I am a prevention educator for the Mercer Council on Alcoholism and Drug Addiction. I am the Mercer County Grant Coordinator. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Global Studies, Political Science, and American Studies. I'm certified in teaching English as a foreign language, life skills training, and leadership. So I also start with this as well. Why this presentation? One, this is not to scare you. Two, this is to inform you. This is not a parenting class. You are the best parent for your child. You know them the best. You've known them longer probably than they've known themselves. And once again, this may be technically labeled as a parenting class, but this also means that this is a class for anyone interacting with youth or anyone working with children, and they just want to learn more about how to interact with them and how to help them navigate their own realities. Once again, this is my perspective. So this is shaped by my approach, by my learning experiences and how I navigate the prevention education world. This is an evidence-informed and some evidence-based presentation, meaning I take all of the information I've looked up, I take all of the information that I know, all of the information that is available to me from the Mercer Council, and I put it in this presentation, and I list the resources below in the presentation so anybody can go over them with me while we go through these segments. So we're going to be talking about the history of 420. And I never wondered if I was going to be looking up the history of 420, but here we are. And a lot of people wonder what it's like. So maybe if we sort of understand the history of it, then we can sort of understand how it became a cultural phenomenon. So 420 really didn't exist before the year 1971. And it was by 5 students in California, of all places. And basically what they had done was after school, they were all athletes. And after school, they were like, well, you know what, let's meet on the quad and let's just, hotbox our car, at 4:20 p.m. Every time they had sports practices. So this really is an interesting take on what 420 means, because it never had anything to do with the day or any other place in history besides the fact that they just wanted to meet at 4:20 because that's when the classes were over. And that's sort of just how this cultural phenomenon had sort of rolled itself into the mainstream, which I find interesting. If anybody doesn't know what hotbox means, it's lingo for essentially taking marijuana, smoking it in a car, and making sure that the smoke doesn't escape the vehicle so that you can supposedly get a bigger high, because all the smoke is inside the vehicle. So we're going to move on to what's there to worry about. And essentially, there are a lot of ways to conceal marijuana. There's vaping, which we will be talking about, stashes, which we will also be talking about, and edibles, especially concentrations of THC that are unknown to a lot of people before they start eating or using them in some capacity. We also need to worry about potency. We will be discussing this later on in the presentation, but I'm just going through the outline now. We have developing brains, adolescents, as long as they don't have any substances inside of their brains that aren't good for them, then they can really have a fighting chance in having a very fulfilling life later on. And also there's this sort of interesting casual use, giving permission to a lot of adolescents, especially around the time of 420. One, because they can just decide to use it whenever they want during 420 if they have people around them that use it. But two, it sort of gives them language and a lot of casual resources to sort of sift through and come to their own opinions, but they may not always know the full story if they're exposed to just the good parts of marijuana. So there's that. So I do want to talk about the legality of marijuana in New Jersey, because this has been such an interesting topic, but also there are a lot of discrepancies here. And I just want to sort of, excuse the term, but hash out a lot of the the weird nuances that people really aren't familiar with when it comes to New Jersey policy. So first thing, I just want to put this out in the open. This is not legal advice. I am not a lawyer. I am not a police officer. I am not a law enforcement agent of any sort. I am here to provide education and to provide prevention education so that everyone can know what that means and make their best decisions on their own accord. And I just give information away. So I am not here for consulting, and I'm not here to for anyone to sort of use as a legal defense. So that's out of the way. Um, for in particular, New Jersey policy for adults essentially is that marijuana is legal recreationally and medicinally for all residents over the age of 21. And that means that you have to have some things in small amounts. So possession of 6 ounces or less of marijuana and using it on private property is now decriminalized in New Jersey for people ages 21 and up. And this means you can't be criminally charged for possessing marijuana. And what this means, and I do want to go down here for a second, when it says decriminalization versus legalization, a lot of people are wondering what the difference is. So legalization essentially means that marijuana is legal. Cool, and because it's legal, there are a lot of ramifications to that, meaning businesses and municipalities and ordinances have to sort of work around what that looks like. So it really does change the structure of the way people interact with marijuana in any capacity. So whether it's a cannabis store, a vaping shop, things like that, they can start selling THC, but they may have to have licensures for those things. And there's a lot of nuance to it. If you're wondering about more of the nuances of the New Jersey bill, I do have a presentation that will be linked down below, but I do talk about the nuances of the New Jersey marijuana bill, but also how to talk to your kids about it, because you really do want to give them language where they can understand how they stand on that bill and what that may look like. That was also recorded before the official changes to the marijuana policy came into play, but there's still a lot of great information in there, and most of it is still relevant. So back to this. Decriminalization is a little bit different. So the legalization changes the way municipalities and law enforcement sort of work together when it comes to looking at where marijuana can happen, in what spaces it can happen, and in things like that. Decriminalization essentially means that if you're caught with marijuana in any capacity, if you sell marijuana illegally in any capacity, you won't necessarily have a criminal charge. And a criminal charge meaning that you most likely won't get jail time for something like this. So a person may receive a citation or receive an infraction or receive something on their record, but that doesn't mean that it is a criminal offense and will less likely affect their prospects for jobs later on if they're looking to go down different routes than marijuana. Also, there are a couple ordinances we're talking about municipalities here, and I don't want to get too much into it just because I feel as if we're still learning as we're going. But the things that we do know are sort of this, and I'm going to go through this with you. So just stick with me as I sort of go through some numbers. Ordinances have until August 21st to opt out of having marijuana in their municipality, meaning they have all this time to figure out whether or not they want a marijuana place in their town, because it may be tax revenue, it may affect the way it interacts with their sociocultural concepts that they may have in the town, their layouts. So there's a lot to affect here. There's a lot to take into consideration. So when you have municipalities that are opting in, that means they'd be opting in, but also in the time that they would opt in, they'd have a lot of discrepancies to work through and sort of come up with laws saying a marijuana shop can't be within 2 miles of a school or something like that. So it may have a different sort of connotation when it comes to that, but municipalities still have control over the way marijuana looks in their towns and way that environment would look. So whatever that looks like, each ordinance can sort of decide on their own, but that's essentially where we're at right now. It also does change the tax structures and the cannabis-based businesses. So that is a lot more numbers and a lot more technicality than I'm comfortable with, but just letting you know those things are out there. And I do have resources listed for anyone that's interested to go over that law themselves and sort of understand the municipality ordinances as well. So the New Jersey policy for anyone under the age of 21 looks a little different. In the first reiteration of the marijuana legislation, there was a discrepancy between warning parents on whether or not uh, whether or not their child should have the police notify the parent about the child using alcohol or marijuana the first or second time, and it was only after the third time was the parent or were the parents notified. And this obviously ruffled a lot of feathers, rightfully so. So they have rebranded and reiterated and passed a amendment to this policy or this part of the legislation, saying that anyone under the age of 21 who was caught using marijuana, their parents will have a call after the first use of marijuana. So that is something that has changed and something that a lot of parenting groups were very thankful for. So when we're talking about marijuana, a lot of people want to know the difference between CBD and THC. And I do touch upon this in my other videos that will be listed below when I talk about marijuana, but I just want to touch over this quickly because it may change some of the language that you may be using when you're talking to any sort of child in your life. So CBD right now in almost all states is legal, meaning CBD is the marijuana part. It stands for cannabinoid, if I'm not mistaken. It's a really long scientific name, so I apologize if I'm not saying it correctly. But CBD is legal in most states. It produces a high, it does not produce a high. It both CBD and THC interact with the cannabinoid system. And and THC stands for tetrahydrocannabinoid, meaning that it is a different molecular structure than CBD, but is derived both from the marijuana plant. And a good portion of the chemical that comes out of marijuana is naturally CBD. So a lot of times people can use CBD to relieve pain. People who are going through chemo can use it for nausea, migraines, anxiety, depression. A lot of people use it for decreasing their seizures, pain management, things like that. So a lot of people may want to say that CBD and THC are the same thing. And there have been a lot of claims that there are, but in reality, they're not. THC is the psychosomatic part of the marijuana plant, meaning that this is the part that produces the high. And when it produces the high, it interacts with our brain differently than CBD does. They both interact with our cannabinoid systems, meaning our receptors that grab onto dopamine and things like that. But in reality, they both don't have the same benefits, and you cannot trade one for the other in order to justify using CBD or THC. So if you are saying, I'm here for medical marijuana, if you have THC, then you may also just be using it recreationally. Also, just a heads up, when you go into most bud tending places or marijuana places that sell marijuana in any capacity, when you order or you look at CBD, there will be trace amounts of THC in there, most likely, just because CBD does have trace amounts of THC. As well as the fact that someone could say this is medicinal marijuana, and the bud tender could actually be giving you THC when you were looking for CBD. So always be careful of that when you are interacting with the drug. And I get this question a lot. Can one get addicted to marijuana? I think that because marijuana has a really, it's like a hot button issue right now. So we sort of have a lot of misnomers about what marijuana can do to us. There are people that are saying, it can automatically kill you, and there are people that are saying it's not bad for you at all. So we're just going to sort of plateau a lot of that discussion, just so we can sort of look at the science and look at how people may be addicted or may have a substance use disorder to marijuana in some capacity. First thing is that marijuana can lead to the development of problem use, and this is called marijuana use disorder. And I'm going to sort of start with that because marijuana use disorder basically means that it is a substance use disorder in some capacity. So if you have to wake up and smoke marijuana, if you have to fall asleep to marijuana, if you have to reward yourself after the end of a very long day constantly and use it as a way to reward yourself all the time, that changes the way your behavior is, right? So that that is something that is cause for concern. And dependence doesn't necessarily mean automatically chemical dependence, but it can mean that you have dependence in some capacity in your daily life, in the way that you run your life, the way that your body interacts with the world. These are all things that dependence can come from, and that doesn't mean that you have to be chemically addicted in order for it to be a thing that disrupts your daily life. Also, a lot of the time when people say addiction, they may also be talking about substance use disorder, which addiction is the last stage in substance use disorder. So, a substance use disorder is a gradient, meaning it has so many steps before it. So, when you see people having gradual usage over time, if they build up tolerance, if they use it to self medicate, if they are using it and choosing it over friends and relationships, these are all problems to be addressed. And these are all causes for concern, right? So it's not just one thing, and it happens with mostly anything that can be considered a substance. So it's not as if marijuana is the only drug that interacts this way with anything, but it is something to cause for concern, because if you are using something and you are using it over a period of time where you build a tolerance to it and you want to use more and use more and use more, then slowly over time, our body gets so used to it that the dependence on it can be very difficult to satiate. Now, I have here a brain scan. A lot of people, I've touched upon this quite a bit of time. I actually have a video with Vanessa DeRosa when we talk about, she's a Protecting You, Protecting Me prevention educator. And what we talk about is the brain and how it sort of interacts with all types of drugs, not just marijuana, not just opioids, a lot of different types of drugs, right? So there are a lot of different things that go into our brain, into our body, that our brain decides to sort of use and processes it in a way that either helps us or hurts us depending on what it is, right? So we have here, I just decided to have this because I always use this picture with my students because I think it's really poignant. On the left side is a healthy brain, and on the right side is an 18-year-old, which is a daily user of cannabis that started using cannabis about 4 years prior. So this is about 4 years of use right here. And the reason why I say this, and the reason why this is so important, and the reason why marijuana is for 21 and older, recreational and medicinal marijuana for 21 and older, is because the brain is still developing. The brain doesn't stop developing until mid 20s, meaning that any stage before then, any sort of place that we would have any substances interacting with the brain, we want to mitigate as much as possible to make sure that there are no holes in the brain, that the brain is healthy, not bumpy, and because the brain is sort of just like a lump of fat with a lot of nerves, that's kind of complicated but a little simple. We want to mitigate as much as possible because it is so sensitive, because it is so fragile, because it changes the formation of your brain if you put too much into your body. So your brain becomes dependent on these sorts of things, which can be an issue over time. I also have a very interesting article that I had read through. It was habitual versus chemical addiction. And I just wanted to just look through here for a second, because the introduction basically talks about the fact that habitual and behavioral, or behavioral addiction slash habitual versus chemical. Obviously, chemical can be harder to go through your daily life because you become much more dependent on it. But when it becomes behavioral, it can really start to affect your life the same way chemical addiction can, because you become addicted to the feeling of having something, the feeling of being involved in this substance or being involved in an activity over time. Now, everyone has their vices, everyone decides to interact with the world differently, but this is something to keep in mind, that even though they say, can you be Can you have a use disorder based around marijuana? Of course you can. It's a substance like anything else. So therefore your brain can get addicted to the way that it interacts, and it changes the neurotransmitters. And if you start too young, then it really does change the formation of the brain. But later on in life, if your brain is fully formed, you can still form habitual and chemical reactions to marijuana as well. So you're not out of the park when it comes to that sort of thing, because a substance use disorder sneaks up at any time. So I also want to talk about bud tenders, because we do have a lot of that that sort of, I guess, interesting pop culture stuff going on, when one who wants to be called a bud tender, that's kind of interesting. But two, a lot of people may have some misnomers about the way that you interact with marijuana when you go into a dispensary. So they sort of dispel some of this, but I also want to touch upon the stuff that may be misleading, or may be slightly dangerous claims here that we will discuss afterwards.
If there was one thing I think I wish the new patients knew when they first walked into the shop, it was probably just that all the information that they got online, it's not necessarily always relatable to you.
One thing I wish first-time patients would know is that they can't touch the flower.
You can't touch the bud. It's like a strip joint. You can look, but don't touch.
People come in, first thing I'll tell them, hey, you can smell it, you can take a look, please don't touch it. The first thing to do is touch it.
They're like, oh, okay, let me touch it. Like a kid. I'm like, no, no touching, honey.
They want to smell every single jar, but then they know what they're gonna get already. And I'm fine with that. It's just, when there's a line, it's like, you know what you're gonna get already. Just.
They sometimes get very upset because of the taxes right now.
There's a heck of a lot of tax, and your price is gonna change.
I wish they knew coming in that your lungs and your liver process THC differently. So just because you're an OG smoker and you can smoke the heavy stuff of today, doesn't mean you can handle a 100 milligram edible.
When you get a bottle of Xanax and it says 10 milligrams a pill, it's 10 milligrams a pill, and it's kind of like the same way with an edible. It's always best to start less.
You start with 5 like the rest of us and figure it out. Let's not risk it and have you call the hospital thinking that you're dying.
I wish they knew that it's okay to ask things and not just assume. Because a lot of times people will come in first time and they act like they know everything.
Well, no, like I read this, or like, oh, like my friend told me this, and it's like, just keep your mind open, go in there and try some stuff out.
I don't know, just give me the best strain. Okay, so are you in the mood for creativity? Are you in the mood for relaxing your body?
It's not gonna kill you. Try it a little bit, see how it does, bring it back. If you don't like it, we'll give you something else.
It's medicinal now. You're not coming in here just to get high.
It's a medicine. That's what it's there for, first and foremost, is to provide relief.
There's so many questions about CBD, and it's so beneficial. I wish the general populace knew that.
For a lot of people, it takes seeing it to believe it. A family member of mine who has never consumed or smoked weed in their lives now uses CBD to sleep. And this is someone who still would never smoke weed, but is now fully understanding the use and the benefits of this plant.
Okay, so I thought that was an interesting video, just because there are a lot of claims there, and I just wanted to break it down just a little bit to make sure that people understand what that sort of looks like. So first thing is, they were right. You cannot touch the actual product when you walk into a dispensary, but also they are trained in selling, not doses. So they are trained in knowing what a product looks like, knowing what a product does, maybe to the body to a certain extent, because they may have used it themselves, but that is the only frame of reference they have. Most of the time when people come in with a medicinal card, it's not something that your doctor is able to just say, all right, you can have 5 milligrams of CBD per week. Especially in New Jersey right now, there is no way for it to be regulated that way right now. And that is something that is of concern, one, because it's not federally regulated, but two, because it's state by state. You may be getting different realities or different things that people say in one joint versus another. So that's something to cause for concern as well. The other is that they had a lot of good points when it came to say, like, start smaller if you are going to use marijuana and you're 21 and older, but also understanding that this is the 21 and older crowd. So when you are interacting with the drug itself, then you may want to self-regulate and things like that. But there were some concerns there when they were sort of talking about it. Also, Once again, they are not doctors, and it is expected to experiment and self-regulate, meaning that when you are experimenting and self-regulating, make sure to not do it around children, but also the more exposure to regular use that children have, the more likelihood they have of using it themselves. So there's a lot of discrepancies there as well. I also wonder if people are talking about bud tenders and the way that they interact with marijuana and things like that. Just to know that if you are a bud tender and you have that on your resume, because it is not federally regulated, employment may be very difficult to find after you are out of the marijuana industry. So if you are staying here, if you intend to stay there, then that's fine. But most of the time, because it is not federally regulated, it can be difficult for people to look at a resume and see whether or not it is something good for their company after. So there's that as well. Oh, that always happens. Okay, so I just want to put it out there that we are concerned for a lot of reasons. But one person in the video had asking a bartender did say that there are a lot of things that are too new to truly understand the health impact on your lungs, the health impact of your stomach. If you smoke marijuana versus if you ingest it, that looks very different. The chemical makeup and the way that it interacts with your body is different. Everybody is individual, which means it cannot be regulated the same way alcohol can, because at the same time when they were talking about marijuana strains, one in particular bud tender said, do you want to be creative? Do you want to relax? That's usually not how that works. Marijuana, when it interacts with your body, just interacts with your body. It's sort of saying like, if you drink certain alcohol, does it make you meaner or not? It's just that that person already has that inside of them, and it just brings it out more so, and it lowers those kinds of inhibitions. So marijuana does not make people anything other than what they were already before, or what they already had inside of them. Also, there are many counterfeit or cheaply made black market components. And also, because there is a lot of resources here, they may say they're there for CBD or THC. There are concentrated forms that come in the form of oils. So if you have CBD oil versus THC oil, there are a lot of black market counterfeits for both. And that is a true concern for a lot of different reasons, but more so because there are cheaply made black market components to this, the CDC had faced a huge phenomenon that happened, I believe, in late 2019, which was EVALI, which is e-cigarette vaping lung-related illness. I may have gotten that a little bit messed up, but I have done a presentation on EVALI before if you are looking for those resources down in the description below. And really what it talks about is a lot of the cases, 84% of the cases were due to black market THC oils. Now, this is cause for concern for a lot of reasons. One, because that's a huge number, but two, it's also that people are finding ways to have the black market in their lives and how the black market interacts with their bodies, but also the way that they access their THC. So even if it is legal in some areas, if you reach it on the black market because it's cheaper, then you are still getting a product that could hurt you a lot more than it can help you. Here I have a vaping website just so we can look at it quickly. Once again, once I click on it, it doesn't ask me if I'm 21 or older. That's something that I wanted to point out as well. Excuse me for a second. So this is the THC products that you can find on this website. I believe these are just empty cartridges, but you can put anything inside of them, and they don't sell THC oil explicitly on this, or I have searched through the website. They have vape juice, but it all is related to nicotine right now. But at one point, vaping.com did have THC products. So that is something to know as well. Oh, they also have tutorials on how to use these vaping products in case anybody was interested about that. We are sort of talking about the ways we are concerned, but I think the biggest way we should be concerned is the normalization of something that isn't necessarily completely understood, and in the way that it interacts with the body and the way that it interacts with society, right? So I found the 420 hashtag on TikTok, and it is just the 420 hashtag. not marijuana, not CBD, not THC, not medical marijuana. This is just TikTok 420. And I was kind of shocked at the amount of views that this TikTok hashtag had. 4.3 billion views. And this is for a lot of different things. So when people are sort of talking about 420 on TikTok, one, it's not something that's regulated the same way. So you have to be at, I believe, at least 13 or older, or 16 or older. I think they may have changed it to join TikTok, but that doesn't mean that you are ready to be exposed to these sorts of things because you're 16, not 21. So they have a lot of different videos on 420, whether it's people just vaping to music, vaping THC oil to music, whether they're just making edibles in their house, whether they are doing an activity while they're high. These are all things that are interesting to look at, but also a lot of children could be exposed to things like this. So see, they have brownies here. They also have a lot of claims when it comes to THC and CBD and marijuana in general. There may be people that say this cured my ADHD, this cured my depression, this cured my anxiety. In reality, depression, ADHD, and anxiety all exist within a person, and it probably doesn't change. That's not something that changes in a person. It can be something that's managed. So whenever there are claims that say this cured me, that should always be looked into as well. So basically, this is a lot of the same thing, but I thought this number, especially 4.3 billion views, was very concerning for a lot of different reasons. So that is something, and it is plentiful, and it is out there, and that is just TikTok. That's not Twitter, that's not Facebook, that's not Discord, that's not Instagram. So these are all just based around one social media platform. So we're going to sort of be moving on just because edibles were in the mix of what that means. And they have sort of alluded in the last video, they had sort of alluded to edibles. And most of the time this is used through vaping THC and CBD oil. And they put oils in a lot of products. So for them to sort of eat it without really tasting it or smoking it or vaping it. So once again, when you have edibles, there are some not so desirable side effects. So I'm just going to read through these really quickly. Confusion, thirstiness of dry mouth, they call that cotton mouth, concentration problems, slow reaction times, dry eyes, fatigue, headaches, dizziness, increased heart rate, because it does increase your heart rate, which also gives you anxiety and can change your mood. And if it doesn't interact with your body the right way, then it can really cause people to have panic attacks, to feel unsafe, and things like that, lots of paranoia. In rare cases, it can also cause hallucinations, nausea, vomiting, paranoia, and panic attacks. Because most of the time when people try to sort of understand edibles, especially children that don't really know how it interacts with their body, they will eat something, an edible, and maybe they'll take too much, and they'll say, oh, this isn't working. You know, I waited 20 minutes. Why is it not hitting me? You know, this is annoying. And then they take more, and they realize that they have taken too much after about an hour because it's gone through their system, it's been digested by their stomach, and now the THC or CBD, or THC especially, is going through their system, and they've sort of gone into a reality that they may not be completely comfortable with. So this is interesting, but also a cause for concern, because a lot of people don't really understand that overdosing does not mean death. Overdosing just means going over what is the actual dosage of what your body would need to function at a level that you would still be able to get through the day. It is a doctor recommendation. And this is why, especially because it's not regulated, especially through doctors in New Jersey right now, we don't want to start seeing overdoses of marijuana and people going to the emergency room based on nausea and vomiting and any of those undesirable side effects. So that is concerning. And also the fact that children don't know what a good dose looks like. And the only way you do know what a good dose looks like is if you keep using. And that may not be the best place or the best thing for children, especially when their brains are still developing. Um, I have poison control here. You can just go through this website, and it just the New Jersey Poison Center. And any questions, all questions, healthcare professionals are on the line. This is for anyone that needs to know anything about overdosing on marijuana or understanding their body and the way that it interacts with marijuana if they feel like they've done something wrong. That is a number that can always be used to sort of go back on that process. So I also want to reiterate that 420 is not the place for experimentation. One, because there's sort of this cultural phenomenon around it. So if you start something based on, I'm going to do this, I'm going to smoke for the first time on 420, that's probably not the best choice to make. And there are a lot of reasons for this, but I always ask children, especially the kids that I work with, that are they asking, am I doing this to fit in with my friends? Am I doing this to spite my parents? Why do I want to do it? Where is the source of the desire coming from? And understanding that if you're not 21, you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. So that's also the reality there too. But if they are looking to smoke marijuana or engage in marijuana in some capacity, there's still something to be said that they need to know the source of their why. Why do they want to do it? What is the best, way to do it for them? All that stuff. Those are all things they have to consider. And these are really hard questions because they may think they have an easy answer, but it all interacts with the body in a different way. So edibles look very different from vaping. That may look different from smoking. So these are all things that if they say, oh, I've tried edibles before, that's fine, and they try vaping, their body could have a completely different reaction. So this is not, 420 is not the space for it because it adds to a lot of the pressure of trying to do it right or trying to give honor to the day. So we don't want that to happen. We don't want that sort of pressure to be present if children are even thinking about engaging these sorts of activities. I also want to talk about weed dependency, just because I think that a lot of children, especially when they're saying, "Oh, I'm not, I'm not, addicted or I'm not dependent on it," and this person is a doctor, and they talk about how weed interacted with their body, and what's the right approach when it comes to marijuana when you do decide to do so. All right, give me a second. This is a long video, so we're only going to do a portion of it.
Weed became something that I enjoyed it, and I got more and more into it. So I had bought a one hitter, I had bought a PAX 3 vaporizer unit, and it was all just dry herb that we were consuming. It was all dry herb. And it became something that I started to do on a nightly basis. I just said, okay, I'm going to go to school during the day. I was in college at the time, and I'm just going to come home and smoke at night. And that was kind of my routine. I'd work hard all day long in school. And as a reward, which I think this is where the trouble started, I would smoke at night. And I started to view that as kind of my reward for the day. And I was rewarding myself no matter what I did or did not accomplish during the day, which probably not a good thing overall. But weed was my reward at night. I'd work really hard, come home, fall asleep, watch a movie, whatever it was, take 1 to 2 hits. I was never one to get like super high. That just wasn't me. But that was great. So, okay, things were pretty good there. I can tell you, after about a year or two of that, it was definitely something I started to have to do to fall asleep. And I think that's where the first signs of dependency began. I would get very frustrated and aggravated during situations where I couldn't smoke. I remember even being on vacations trying to find weed. I'd be like talking to the busboy at a restaurant or the valet guy parking the car. I'd be like, hey man, can you get me some weed? Even when I was away. And that was probably, I should have started to get a little bit concerned around that point. But at that point in time, I didn't view weed as anything negative. I only saw it as positives. But I was definitely starting to show signs of dependence. I needed it to sleep. My mood would get real antsy at night if I didn't smoke. And I'd just become frustrated. I would get cravings in the evening if I wasn't smoking. And that's kind of where the addiction, I think, began. That's really where it started. So now here I went from just smoking every once in a while with friends to smoking every weekend with friends. And now here I am smoking every night just to be able to fall asleep. And this is now probably the age of 25, 26. I had my first edible somewhere in this process, and I think I've had edibles 3 times in my life. My first edible was a horrible experience. I was out with some people. We were, unfortunately, we were shooting some shotguns. I was like skeet shooting. No one told me it was an edible. I don't know why edibles were even at this event, but they were. And I remember taking it and being like, wow, about after 90 minutes, I was like, I feel really weird. And I'm talking to my buddy. I'm like, dude, something's not right. I got to go. And he's like, oh, well, you ate that entire edible. I was like, what? And I just couldn't comprehend the fact that here we were with shooting clay birds and there was edibles going around, and it was really a horrible experience. Naturally I stopped shooting and I just wound up laying down for like the rest of the day. It was a horrible experience. We won't go into the details, but I hated it. I hated the feeling. I hated the high. I didn't like anything about it. And then from that point in my life, I did edibles maybe 1 or 2 more times.
Okay. So he does talk about more of his marijuana dependency. And I did want to put this out there because there are people that say that this is, marijuana is the miracle drug, CBD is the miracle drug. And in some capacities, if it works for people and it's legal and they use it for the purposes that it's meant for, then fine. But there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot to understand. There's still more to understand when it comes to marijuana, especially marijuana dependency. And I sort of wanted to pose the question that when does marijuana become a problem? And for some people, it could be after the first use. For some people, it's after the 1,000th use. And I think that's why the discrepancy is just, one, interesting, but two, something that is always needed to be regulated and to be paid attention to, because that doesn't mean that, like it's okay. That doesn't mean that it's right. And especially when we're getting marijuana off the street. I know that there are a lot of people that get it from dispensaries, but if you're getting it off the street, your high one night could look very different from another based on your supplier. And that's something really hard. That's a hard pill to swallow. That's something that's not easy to understand. And especially when you get it from, from illegal sources, because it can be really concerning, especially when it interacts with your body. So he sort of talks about marijuana dependency and, what's the right approach when it comes to marijuana use? One, I don't think there is one. Two, I think it depends on the individual. And three, whether or not that person can be primed for addiction. And we all know that youth and people below the age of 21 can be primed for addiction because of the way that their brain is still forming and how marijuana interacts with our cannabinoids and can change our neurotransmitters. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. And I wanted to put this in there, one, because he doesn't really demonize marijuana, but he talks about it in a way that makes sense. He talks about it in a way that it interacts with his body. He talks about it in a way that he used it as a reward at first, and over time it became a dependency. And if he sought after it, he kept searching for it. So that's something that really, was, I found very poignant when we were going through the video together. This always happens. Okay. All right. So there may be a lot of questions where you're posing, what can I do? What are the things that I can do to mitigate any harm that could come to my child? One, be involved in their life. I think that's the biggest one. Know who their friends are, know what their room looks like, know what activities they're doing, know what their hobbies are. That's the biggest one. Two, when they come to you for questions, know they are curious and is not always about them using a substance. Meaning that if they're coming to you asking you about marijuana, telling them about it will not make them use it. And them asking about it does not mean they are using it. What it does mean is they are curious. And if you are there to have an open and honest conversation, then that's an important part of your relationship. But also know that if you say, or if you don't know the answer to their questions about, marijuana or any other substance, Know that there are so many resources out there that you can choose and use at your own disposal. And once again, we're at the Mercer Council, so you can engage with us at any time and ask us any questions, and we will gladly answer them. Also, have an open dialogue with your children. Make sure that if you are unable to completely understand them the first time, make sure that they are coming back to you for questions. They are coming back to you for these hard conversations. And the next point is have hard conversations. If children are able to come to you for the smaller stuff, they will come to you for the bigger stuff. And that's how it builds trust over time. You're building a rapport, you're building that sort of relationship with them when they are being socialized way outside of just you and your family. Give them other activities to do. That's also another part to this. Maybe they're just bored. Maybe there are things that they would like to do that they haven't done. Maybe there are activities that you all could do as a family. And especially during this time, giving children the right to play, the right to grow, the right to interact with their environment in healthy ways can be a huge part of that process. Also, give them reassurance that they are doing their best. And sometimes that's all children need. Children grow up with the reality that they haven't lived through the things we've lived through yet, meaning they may not have a lot of reference for understanding that they're going to live through this, that they're going to get through this. Like middle school mostly was terrible for people, but especially for youth that are still going through it, it feels like a never ending cycle of misery sometimes. And that can be very difficult to understand. So giving them the space and reassuring them that they are doing their best when they're interacting with their environment, when they are interacting with their friends, when they are asking you questions, let them know that they're doing what they can and that you're proud of them for being the good person that they are. And I really think that's what they need, especially when they are wavering when it comes to substance use. I always end my presentations with a quote, and here's the quote that I wanted to end on. Think for yourself, or others will think for you without thinking of you. And I think that's so true, that when when we look for information, when we gain that information, when we look at things in a way that is very empirical and understanding how we interact with the world and gaining information on substances where we are presented with one thing, but we also collect resources from another place, and understanding where those resources come from really helps us navigate the world for our children and helps us be good examples for our children later on in life. So thank you for your time today. I appreciate your concern and your presence. Also, next week, we will be talking about sexual violence and its interaction with substance use disorders and drugs. So tune in, and thank you for being here, and have a wonderful day. Bye.